More than 250,000 people demonstrate in central London against government spending cuts. A group of activists damaged property and clash with police, leaving 5 officers injured. There have been 75 arrests. But the majority marched peacefully to deliver their message.
Showing the government that they can't dismantle the public services just as easily as that. They'll fight them all the way.
Hello and a very good evening to you. Organisers say more than 250,000 people from around the country took part in today's demonstration in central London against government spending cuts. The march was largely peaceful, but breakaway groups attacked shops and businesses in the West End. 75 people were arrested and 38 people were injured, including 5 police officers. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has this report.
They marched all afternoon, those at the end arriving several hours after those at the front. The organisers say they stopped counting at 250,000.
Cut the bankers, not public services!
A family event had been promised, and that's what it was. Protesters young and old. Many said they'd been directly affected by public sector cuts. The main TUC march was so peaceful, in some places it was policed by a handful of officers.
Keep back, keep back!
But in the afternoon we began to follow around 500 protesters, some with faces covered. They split from the main march and began to attack shops and banks. Fireworks were thrown among bystanders, including children.
Well, this is typical of what's been happening this afternoon. We've seen banks and shops attacked. We've seen lots of items thrown, including fireworks. I've seen a billiard ball thrown. We've had paint thrown at us. We've been threatened by 1 or 2 protesters. And the police are trying to keep control of the situation, but it's very mobile. It's moving all around the West End, and so far it's continuing.
Police largely decided not to contain protesters in one area, but there were still confrontations, sometimes bloody.
See this? Move that, Wham! About move that, lad. Peaceful protest, people. Peaceful protest, yeah?
Despite the damage to buildings, the Met said it was happy with its response to the disorder.
We've had 4,500 officers on central London, dealing with, as I say, 250,000 people protesting peacefully. We suspected that there might be some premises under attack, but we couldn't say which ones, and we just haven't got enough officers to protect every building in London.
Early evening and attention focused on the high-end food store Fortnum and Mason. The group UK Uncut, which calls for businesses to pay more tax, had staged a mass occupation. There was no damage, no violence, but some were arrested. This disorder was taking place a mile from the main rally, but many there wouldn't have known what was going on. The TUC leader said he bitterly regretted that it had happened. Tom Simons, BBC News, in the West End of London.
Ministers say the spending cuts are necessary to reduce the deficit and rebalance the nation's finances. But addressing thousands of protesters in Hyde Park, the Labour leader Ed Miliband condemned what he described as brutal cuts in jobs and services. Our political correspondent Ben Wright reports.
They came by bike and bus, on foot, with their families. Protesters poured into London in their thousands, a coalition of causes standing up to the cuts.
I've never been on a march before. This is quite uplifting. Yes, I've always avoided them. I've not really ever been in a position where I felt strongly enough to actually march against anything, whatever it was.
And now you do?
I do, very much so, yeah.
I'm marching for education, for University and College Union, and for the rights of people that have been knocked off welfare benefits. And I'm fighting for our health service. That's why I'm here today.
If it was staggered, maybe it would be more acceptable, but the way they've gone about it is wrong. And it's putting too much pressure on people.
The march snaked through the capital towards a rally in Hyde Park.
We're here to send a clear message to the government.
To hear speakers demand an alternative to the government's goal of eliminating the budget deficit over the next 5 years, with deep spending cuts doing most of the work. One union leader said there should be no cuts at all. Labour's leader conceded that there had to be some, but said his party would cut the deficit more slowly.
Our struggle, friends, is to fight to preserve, protect and defend the things we value. Now we know what this government will say. This government will say, this is a march of the minority. They are so wrong.
Ed Miliband said this was a march of the mainstream, careful not to look like the union's man. Next month, the cuts to public spending will really start to be felt, and there may well be more demonstrations like this in the months and years ahead. Ed Miliband has tied himself now into the anti-cuts cause. The coalition argues that so long as he doesn't spell out what he would do instead, his opposition cannot be credible.
The one thing that is certain is that if we weren't taking the strong, decisive action that we're taking now, then the absolute certainty is that Britain would have decades of our children and our grandchildren picking up the bills for our failure to deal with it now.
The argument between the government and Labour is over the pace of cuts, so they'll be difficult to stop. But today was proof that they're not going to be popular. Ben Wright, BBC News.
That's it from us. More on the day's stories on the BBC News channel. Also, don't forget the clocks go forward an hour overnight. British summertime begins tomorrow. Have a good night.